So welcome everybody. We've got another installment of the We Can Climate Champions Storytelling Initiative. And today we've got Mary Wagner, who's Langford City Councillor, and Dora Stroud with the Greater Victoria Climate Action Hub. So welcome, Mary and Dora. And maybe just take a minute to introduce yourselves. Dora, you're on my left, so why don't you start?
Okay, good afternoon. Yes, my name is Dora, and I am co-chair of the Greater Victoria Climate Hub. We have a small group of people from various locations within the CRD, and we help each other, support each other in our actions, our climate actions, and also getting out and talking to people, involving people in climate action within their communities. Especially, we like to talk to the community councillors.
And speaking of whom, Mary, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, so yes, I'm Mary Wagner, and I'm a new councillor. It still feels new. It's been basically a year since I was elected. At our anniversary of election on October 15th, and our inauguration was November 7th. So I'm not actually a CRD director. We don't have a process in Langford to elect our directors. So we have an appointed councillor, but I am on the CRD Water Commission. And so I represent Langford in the Water Commission, as well as the Climate Action Task Force, which is kind of cool because even though I'm not a CRD director, so I'm not on the Environment Committee, I get to be part of the CRD, stay in the loop with this Climate Action Task Force. And yeah, I also have a couple of kids and working on that whole new role of being a counselor. And
that's right.
Really
and this is an exciting week because you guys are just wrapping up your public input on the strategic plan. Is that right?
That's right. So we closed the survey and it just went public. The data is coming out. We're going to see it at council meeting on Monday coming up. And yeah, so it's really happy to see a couple hundred people filling out the survey, about 75 to the open house. We went out to the high school, which was really interesting to talk to the grade 12 career classes and get some youth feedback. And yeah, starting to see the results. And one thing that I was really happy to see in the staff report for Monday's meeting is that they are actually suggesting that we take a little more time to look at the public input. There was a lot of open feedback, and the survey is easy to see what the results were. But in terms of reading through all of the open feedback and really taking it to heart, I'm hoping that when council discusses it on Monday, that we'll take staff recommendation to look at it a little more in depth.
Excellent. Yeah. So the results are positive. You got a lot of feedback on it.
Yes, there's some good news for some things that are near and dear to my heart. So sustainable development and climate change and environmental stewardship. Just looking at the data on the other screen, were very high priorities for the majority of participants. There is going to always be, a big variety of responses, but there was some good trends there and some interesting feedback. So even though people were quite interested in climate change and environmental stewardship, they didn't necessarily see the need for a climate action specialist as a staff member.
Okay.
So I've got my work cut out for me to explain the roles of the city councillor. We give direction, but we need staff to do the work. So
of course, yeah.
A great benefit of getting public feedback is knowing what sort of knowledge is just sort of general out there and where we can hopefully let people know the value of different programs if they hadn't seen it yet, or follow the direction if they're like, no, this is a clear priority for the entire community, then we should probably be listening, right? But if
exactly, yeah. And it can be, I imagine it must be hard to tell the difference sometimes between feedback that might be genuine and sincere and you need to listen to it, and feedback that may be misdirected or misinformed or underinformed.
Exactly. You can look at what what could be different reasons for the data. I love data, so I'm all over this. I'm really excited to have this public engagement. And it is the first ever strategic plan for Langford. So we've been a
Right.
city for 30 years, but it's our first draft of a strategic plan. And we've been increasing public engagement over this first year. And we've actually had a lot of criticism, like it's never enough. Where's the transparency? Where's the openness? Where's the public engagement? And I feel we are doing it. I think it's very important and it takes a lot of time, and it's more than we've done before in Langford, and it's a learning process. So this is just the beginning.
It is, and I think it's fair to say that when you had for those of you who for those watching this that maybe aren't from Langford, there was a big change in the the mayor and council, and after last year's elections, and that change is difficult for people sometimes, and I think that's put a lot of challenges ahead of you. There's some people that are used to things being a certain way, and there's some people that really want that change, and so that's going to cause some friction. And I would like to talk about that, but I think what I'd like to do is, when we spoke last week, we talked about some of the more unusual and unexpected ways that the strategic plan relates to climate action, because the strategic plan is going to be all encompassing, of course. It's not going to all be about climate action. That's what we at WeCan are going to be focused on. But there were a number of things that I think come out in the strategic plan that you wouldn't expect to necessarily be climate action related. And maybe we can talk about that, because I think we can talk about urban canopy, tree canopies, and active transportation to reduce emissions from transportation and home heating. And those are the obvious ones. And I think most people know about those. But some of the less obvious ones that do make a difference. And I know, Dora, you touched on some of those things. What have you seen in the strategic plan that kind of that you like, that were highlights for you coming from that perspective, that might be a little unusual or unexpected?
Well, I'm not sure how completely unusual, but I'm happy to see some focus on development, and especially the idea of increasing, maybe sidewalks or that type of thing. Transportation is always an issue, and here in Langford, if I want to go to the bus downtown, I have to walk 2 kilometers along a road that's pretty dark at certain times of the year and also doesn't have sidewalks. So things that would make people more comfortable in getting out and doing.
So really just, like, I would call those mundane, boring city things, sidewalks and streetlights.
Yeah,
And
they are.
that's you're improving public safety, but you're
Yes.
improving access to existing transit infrastructure.
Yes, yes. And the more safe people feel, the more likely they're out and they are to be out there and do things. There's also this artistic side, the idea of increasing the arts and culture, different, what we call placemaking things these days. So
Right.
keeping people in Langford and enjoying Langford, as opposed to always driving into town to see a show or have some exposure to arts.
So this is really just reducing demand on transportation networks. So that I'm talking as an engineer. So I'll
Yes.
phrase that back in terms of the infrastructure side of things. But if you're developing, to your point there, if you're developing more reasons for people to stay in Langford, then you're reducing the number of trips that people make across town, and that's going to reduce emissions and everything. So, and also our capital infrastructure costs as well.
Yep, absolutely. I took a knitting lesson last night on Station Ave. So not
It's little things.
Not a thing people are likely to do too much.
Knitting and climate action.
There you go. That's keeping everybody warm.
But it is, and that's one of the things I thought was really that really came out for me was it's really acknowledging that it's about creating a livable space for people. That's a lot of it comes down to that.
Yeah, and we heard a lot of feedback about quality of life being sort of more of a centerpiece that people would like to see. We did have a lot of initiatives there in the strategic plan draft, but we also have sustainable development and the climate action, environment and stewardship, and economic development. But those things can really go hand in hand. Like we were saying, if you have an arts and culture in the West Shore and people can walk to where they're going, or they enjoy the local restaurant, and that's good for multiple facets of Langford. And yeah, so finding ways, synergies, because it's going to be tough. It's very ambitious to do all these things that, and Langford always has been ambitious. Like, you know, we grew really quickly because of the past mayor and council being very proactive. They brought in development, they brought in business, and so here we
It
are
was a
trying
huge
to,
boon to the local economy.
yeah.
Did that come with some side effects, shall we say?
Yeah, I would say some growing pains. I sort of say to people sometimes that we're like an awkward teenager in Langford because we've had a growth spurt and now we have to figure out how to, you know, mature and be a city with, it's a very complicated city. So I grew up in Langford. I was born and raised here. And so going from just a sort of a suburb of Victoria where we did go into town if we want to do something. And now there's a lot of pressure on housing. Langford was affordable, but it's, you know, nowhere in the lower island is that affordable. So we have to then go, okay, if we just put in as much housing as quickly as possible, how do we then have our quality of life? So there's that, you know, the infrastructure challenges, the recreation challenges, all kinds of things like the need for more firefighters and RCMP officers. So as you grow, there's a lot more things that are just needed to keep the city functioning. And city staff do a lot of really important work that I feel perhaps is undervalued. And I might have seen that again through the feedback from the strategic planning process is letting the public know just how much they should value their city staff, that's how things get done. And if they want bylaw officers to do something, well, we need bylaw officers, right? So the nuts and bolts, like you said, is not that exciting. I think it's exciting. So I think I'm in the right place as a councillor because I really get into these details.
Right, and it's true. And I live in Victoria, and if you know any interactions I have with city staff, bylaws and whatever, you can tell how overworked they are. Right. And so that's and I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And I'm glad you did that. So you mentioned also sustainable development. And what does that look like in the strategic plan? Because that's kind of an umbrella term. It
Yeah,
means
we put
different
a
things
lot
to
of things
different
in
people.
there. So if and I don't know if Dora noticed as well, but there we have our codes in our draft plan of, you know, whether it's funded or partially funded or not funded at all, and which sort of aspect of life are we addressing? Is it more of a quality of life issue? Is it an environmental issue? So we've got little leaves all over. There's like, I think 32 I counted initiatives that, including updating the housing needs report. It's going to help us address climate change. If we are more resilient, building something like a heat pump, if you're comfortable in your home because of the heating and cooling effects. So in particular, like I'm in a townhouse and it gets super hot in here during the heat dome. My cat was super sick.
Yeah.
We were worried that our little hamster was going to die because they can't take the heat, right? So we have
Right. And you
all
can't
these
escape it
things. Yeah.
if you
So
don't have, yeah, if you've got like your typical 3-story townhouse and the heat rises up to the top floor. I've been in a similar situation too, right? And if you don't have proper cooling in there,
yeah, and it just stays over 30 degrees, even if it does cool outside.
it's true. Yeah.
We're trapping the heat. So if we had something like a heat pump, and it's our building's 2007, it's not that old, but in the newer buildings, if we could just bring that in as a normal part of sort of the climate resiliency. So there's things like building code or not putting in new gas that might help us reduce our emissions and building efficiencies. It's also good for affordability. If you don't need to run an air conditioner because you already have a, you know,
Reduce your
well
energy
insulated
costs.
home or whatever. Yeah. So
Yeah. So that goes beyond what we're talking about in I know there's been a lot of discussion recently around the South Island about the zero carbon step code and accelerating the adoption plans for that. But also even looking beyond that to passive home type standards. Now that's a little bit further off, but those are the kinds of things that you're touching on. By increasing your affordability, and like after you purchase your home, increasing your affordability by reducing your ongoing energy costs.
Yeah, it's sort of a long-term thinking where, over the life of how long you're living somewhere or the life of the building, if you do put in some higher quality at times or just design differently, even just the urban tree canopy, if you have, better distribution of trees, like right now, density is important to some extent in a core. It helps with transportation, but if you take out all the trees, it gets really hot, trying to avoid the heat islands. And making the streets be inviting. Again, if you want people to walk on the sidewalk, there should be shade and beautiful areas. When I talk to people, they're quite interested in beautification, which I didn't necessarily have as a high priority in my mind, as what's most needed in Langford. But when they see a lot of construction, it makes sense that you'd want to see also all this effort put into, let's put in plantings, let's make it beautiful,
Make it a nice place to want to be.
Yeah,
You know,
I think
and
it's good for business too, right? Because people,
of course it is. Well, so you mentioned,
Yes.
and you also mentioned economic development, and that's also important. Again, reducing transportation needs. If you don't have to commute all the way around the peninsula to go to work every day, well, that's going to cut down your transportation costs, but it's also going to cut down on our regional emissions as well.
Mhm. Did you have something to add, Dora?
I wanted to comment that absolutely, I do recognize that the strategic plan was good for identifying that climate action touched a lot of different aspects of the work that was being proposed, the strategic goals. I mean, far more than just specifically working on a climate action plan or that type of thing. That yes, the housing, the changes to the building code, that type of thing would definitely touch on climate change, or could reduce the amount of emissions, and yes, the costs. But we still have to remember that we need healthy people, and we need to make sure that we have healthy places to live, and that people have a good economy. But you can't have a really healthy economy without having healthy people. And so putting some effort into health, and yes, making sure that we reduce the heat island effect, as you refer to, that type of thing is really important, as well as bringing in more healthcare into the local area.
Yeah, that's a really big important one too. So I actually wanted to give you an opportunity, and both of you, because we've got the strategic plan, it's out for review, but that didn't just come out of thin air. You know that it didn't come out of thin
No?
air. So what did it take for you to get? Because you said you haven't gone through this process before. So I'd like to know what did that journey look like to get you here to this place where now you've got a strategic plan that's a draft, and you've got your public input and your engagement and your feedback, and some of the challenges that you faced along the way. I know that there's been some voices of dissent, and sometimes that can be very difficult to deal with. And there's so Mary, you've talked in the past a lot about trying to find that balance between transparency, respecting people's voices, and allowing people to be heard without allowing maybe some of the more militant voices to dominate the conversation, or even hijack the conversation in some cases. The community engagement piece that you talked about, how does that play into the whole conversation and that whole story of how we got here? And is that something that is helping to kind of settle that down?
And I think time will tell, but it's really an interesting process where I do feel that when people are doing the one-on-one in-person engagement, it's been very positive. Even this people that might have been very vocal in a council meeting, which is fine, but we've had people that didn't want to stop talking when their time was up or didn't want to stay on topic to the agenda. And again, the council meetings are sort of a boring process of like, here's our agenda, we've got business to do, and
Yeah.
it when it becomes very politicized, it becomes difficult to do the city business. So that has been a bit of a challenge in terms of just getting the strategic plan draft going. When we had right away a new council, many of us campaigned on things like an official community plan review would be needed and other initiatives that it was very clear that a strategic plan would guide. And it is quite a normal thing for a city, especially of our size, to have any new council, even if it's the same people as last time. Anytime there's an election, you get together and you make
You've
some
got
priorities for the term.
one or two new people in there can change the dynamic of the room completely.
Yeah, and checking in with your previous strategic plan if you had one. Are you on track? What are your new priorities? What's going well? What needs work? And I think it really will align with our budget. So another thing I'm really excited about, the whole idea of having a strategic plan draft form, but eventually something will happen. So it will then be something we can use to really, if we want to achieve these goals, how do you get there? What staff do you need? What resources do you need? What grants can you apply for? Which is another thing we need staff for. So I'm always promoting staff because they go out and get new money. So they might pay for themselves. Like I'm really hoping that somebody that would be able to work on, if you don't want to call it a climate specialist, fine, call it sustainability coordinator or some type of director of, sustainability, whatever you want to call it, or environmental stewardship or whatever. And then they can go out and find ways to promote your town as the place that needs this money for whatever good initiative, right?
Yeah. And as I was going to say, as we've seen, the climate action sustainability, that really just has to factor into everything.
Yeah, so you want a coordinator that's, and for councils, so that every staff report has that, we have an engineer sign off and a planner sign off and our city manager, they all look at it. And if you also had somebody looking through the climate lens at all of the projects, just making sure that we're integrating it, normalizing it, making it part of our day-to-day business. And so James Ridge, you asked a little bit more about how the plan was created. So with the new council, we wanted to have a strategic plan. So we got staff to initiate that. And they went out and found a consultant that is an expert in this kind of thing. And he took us through workshops with staff and with each other so that we could get all our ideas out there. And they're not radical ideas, but still, it's great if it comes from the current council. And so we were able to put our ideas out there and own it and talk about it. And then staff and the consultant had to figure out, how do we actually integrate this into some sort of workflow? What would we need to achieve these things? So there was a part without council involvement with staff and the consultant. And then they came back with the plan and we talk it over again. And so there's an iterative process, a repetitive going through it a few times all together with staff and with council and editing it. So I'm really excited. There's a lot of me in this report, so I'm pretty, personally attached to a lot of it. And yeah,
well, exciting. it sounds like you're enjoying the process and you've managed to stay positive through some very difficult times.
Well,
it hasn't been an easy year for sure.
This is how I feel that we are creating the openness and the transparency and the public engagement. That's how you do it, is you put out your ideas and then you take the feedback and you see where you're at. And each part of this strategic plan should have its own public engagement, and it'll become a lot, I think, improved over time. That, say when we have the transportation plan, engagement about that will be more specific. This was very broad. It's difficult, people have different priorities, but and that's fine. It's just a start, as I said. But when we go into parks management plan, transportation plan, climate action plan. Each one of those would have its own public engagement to be effective as a, city tool. We would tend to always have, a consultant. If we don't have enough staff to do it, we hire a consultant. If we did have in-house staff, it'd be great. But again, usually it would be a consultant because the staff's busy doing day-to-day work already, right? So, and then there'd be the public input, and then council would consider it and then see what to do next. So getting the whole community involved is it's really important to me. So yeah.
But you certainly put a lot of effort into it, and we can see the passion that comes from the work that you're doing. So I think I think Langford's lucky to have you here, to be honest. So what does Langford look like 3 years from now? And I'll open that up to both of you, actually, because I want to hear from both of you.
Perfect. Well, before we toss it to Dora, I'll just add that we are going to look at the strategic plan. It's baked right in there that we look at it every year, right? So it's supposed to be a living document. It's supposed to change over time. It's supposed to be reviewed, check in with how you're doing with your goals. So I see us every year looking back, and if I feel that we're not moving forward on so many of the things that I feel are important and that the public feel are important, then like we got to look at why are we not meeting our goals and what resources are we missing? Where do we maybe be strategic? I mean, we probably can't do all this stuff in a 4-year term. It's a lot in there, but make a start on as many good things as we can. So I feel like we'll have started a lot of awesome things.
So you're laying the foundation for a long-term, long-term priorities. There will be some short-term initiatives, long-term priorities in there, but that strategic plan is going to guide things going forward. And like you said, being a living document, that make sure that it's always up to date.
Staff's learning new computer technology as we go, figuring out how to ask pointed questions. The open questions are really important, but it made a lot of data come in, and now we have to, why'd you collect the data if you weren't going to look at it, right? So, being
so we know what you're doing this weekend.
Yeah.
Well, and I really appreciate hearing that, because it's really important that you do take the time. I know I'm not the only one who is a bit concerned that you were going to get a lot of feedback on this, and that you need to take the time really in a democracy to take a look at the feedback that you're getting, the input that you're getting, and maybe make some modifications to the plan based on that. I think people would be happy to see their concerns reflected a bit in there, and to understand why we're doing things. I mean, the biggest problem that Langford has right now with reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, outside of the fact of that most of those emissions come from transportation, but is actually the growth of Langford has been so tremendous. If you make a comparison to Colwood or other places, you find that their trajectory, they can actually reduce the greenhouse gas emissions more quickly because they're not growing as much as Langford is. So hopefully the future gives us a bit more stability, I think, in our growth. Maybe one of the things we need to understand is how much growth is reasonable here now, and also taking a look at the impact of that growth, not just on climate, but also on the health of people around. And so are we making sure that there's a reduction in pollution and that type of thing to be healthy? The Climate Hub that I am involved with actually put in an air quality monitor very close to the downtown core of Langford, and on the grid with Ministry of Environment, Federal Ministry of Environment, so that people can see what the air quality is on a daily, ongoing basis. So health is really important, and understanding the growth of Langford, and hopefully some beautification. Sorry, I am having a bit of a problem with my earphone.
Oh,
No, those are great points. If I could just quickly comment, a couple of things popped in my head there. Langford is growing faster than anywhere else in the region. In fact, in British Columbia and even across Canada, we're one of the fastest growing regions. So per capita, there was a report that our emissions went down, and a lot of us are looking at the data going, yes, but right. So looking at that, but as a CRD, we are identified as a regional growth area. And so if we're looking at, are we going to have emissions reduced overall with the CRD, with Langford still being, yes, we want to keep reducing our emissions per capita, but like Dora was saying, if we keep growing, our emissions will grow, and there's not a lot we can do. But about bringing that many more people, they're doing a lot more stuff. So that's kind of a complicated thing of looking regionally as well. And how does Langford fit in with that? And what are our realistic targets for us and within the region? And the other comment I want to make was just around the feedback you get is so important, but at the same time, remembering that we don't hear from most people. So as leaders, we still need to say, okay, I want to hear from people. I want to have time to integrate that feedback, but I also need to recognize that we're going to hear from probably the most passionate people on either side of an issue.
Right.
And 80% of people just aren't really that engaged. So you're not going to hear from them. And so good governance is important, and nuts and bolts are important. So things like just balancing a budget as best you can. And yeah, putting in those sidewalks, like regular people just expect that the government will do quite a lot for them, and they aren't taking the time to give us feedback. So weighing the feedback in the context of, we got a couple hundred responses out of 48,000 plus people, right? So,
and that's one of the biggest things that keeps coming up. We live in a democracy, and where are all the people?
they don't vote in municipal elections. Mostly.
Yeah, not as many as we would like, for sure. And then when you have
Get a
the
bit
public
more
feedback,
provincial and a bit more
get more.
federal, but yeah, councils and most people, it's even people that care, will say, right, but I didn't know who to vote for. Like, I didn't want to vote
Right.
because I didn't feel comfortable voting because I didn't know anything about the candidates. And
Right.
so that's another part of just, I'm out there in the community all the time, best I can, just letting people know what
And so
council
people get to
can
know,
do.
who is this Mary Wagner who's on our city council? And, and do we know who she is, and do we like her?
A little
Right.
bit, and also just what do councils do, and how do cities function, and what does staff do, and what are the different, how can the community get more of what they're hoping for from their city hall? I can't fix a lot of things as a councillor, so I have to let people go to engineering or ask the planning department. Like, if they want to know what's going on in their backyard, I don't know, right? So referring people to the city staff. So I have, I feel, a really important role in educating as a bridge between the city functioning staff and then the public.
And I think that's true of most people's interaction with the city. It's there, right? And the sidewalk gets built, and when's the city going to do this? And nobody thinks that there's actually, or I wouldn't say nobody, but unless you're in front of it and you're dealing with City Hall, like you're a developer or something, and you're dealing with City Hall on a regular basis, or you have to engage City Hall to get some issues resolved. It's very it's very much in the back of mind for most people, which I think is the way that it should be. At the same time, you would hope that if people actually have concerns, that they would take the time to voice them. And that speaks to our, to the public engagement. Is that something, do you think, what's driving that public engagement problem? Everyone's got their own answer to that. But is that apathy? Is it a trust issue? These are the questions that, these are the deep questions of democracy.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people still said, oh, I didn't know you guys were doing that, when I would bring up, oh, we're having a draft strategic plan. Do you know about this thing we're doing? And, come to the open house. It happened. It was almost its own best advertising. Once it was over, people were like, oh yeah, I wish I'd gone to that. So next time, I think we can build on that there was interest. And if we communicate even more, but at some point the public does need to be responsible to take an interest if they are interested. So, I do weight the people that bothered to provide feedback. That does carry a lot of weight. I assume that there's going to be a lot of people that agree with anybody that took the time to provide any sort of feedback, good or bad or otherwise, right?
Well,
So,
that kind of, I really liked what you were talking about, bringing back that strategic plan and reviewing it on an annual basis, because that gives people an opportunity like this. Oh no, I missed the strategic plan. When's the next one going to be? Well, 10 years from now, maybe. I don't know. That's and then you're going to miss the boat 10 years from now, or maybe you're going to move away, right? So you're going to miss the boat entirely, or you're a new resident and you're like, what's this 8-year-old strategic plan? I didn't have any say in this. So I think that providing that continuity of public feedback, I feel like that should go a long ways towards establishing trust.
I hope so. I mean, one of my favorite things in there is the review of the official community plan, because it was made in 2008 and it goes, kind of neighborhood by neighborhood and category by category of, do we want to put more energy into food security? I saw quite a bit of feedback about that, actually.
Right.
I've always been saying, hey, we should have a community garden, but how do you actually do it? We
And
need
where do you put
the
them?
community to get behind it. The city is not going to make it appear. We don't have enough park staff as it is. So trying to have more community involvement in building the community, which is hard with the growing community. I mean, I'm not trying to say anybody's not doing what they should be doing. A lot of people just moved here, right? They don't even know what store is down the street yet or what school their kid's going to go to, because there's a lot of new people. So if we can just keep engaging, I think that's key for me.
Speaking from a climate perspective, where would you see those opportunities for low cost, quick things that we can do to make some adjustments?
What do you think, Dora? Putting you on the spot.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One thing that's already underway, of course, is the how are we calling it? The urban tree management plan, which is really a helpful way to take a look at things, anything environmental, reviewing what parks we have and what's our strategy around that. But the low-hanging fruit, as well as also the building codes and getting those in place right away. Getting to that high step building code right away, where developers are actually putting in heat pumps for people. Also, any opportunity that there is to provide additional rebates or assistance for modification of existing homes as well would be helpful. Again, it speaks to people's health as well. We know that there was a lot of people who died in the heat domes, and we want to make sure that people are taken care of.
Yeah, there was a lot of interest in when I looked at some of the feedback from the draft strategic plan. What was it called? The climate mitigation. I have my thing right here. Something about like emergency preparedness, like the basics of what are we going to do if there's another heat dome? How are we going to be for the buildings? We want to be more resilient in the first place. Part of that does include having a proper tree canopy and valuing it. So unfortunately, I keep looking even further down the road. When you say what's the low-hanging fruit, I'm like, yeah, well, we put in a tree protection bylaw just to try to save a few trees along the way as we're moving towards the urban tree management plan. But I'd really like to look at just more of a natural asset, cost benefit planning around, putting a value on a tree, a rock, a feature, making it, our lakes. These are our natural assets. If we,
Right.
aren't valuing them, so the benefit would tend to go towards housing, which, now as a councillor, I have to always be careful that I'm not just saying development's bad, right? That for the province
No, of
wants
course not.
more housing too. So
Yeah.
of course it was a bit of the naive councillor coming in and being like, we need to slow down. And then you get there and go, yes, well, the
It's not that
private,
simple.
the developers own the land, it's private, and they have a right to develop it, and the provincial government protects that. And so they come forward with applications and we're required to look at them. So trying to make sure that we're bringing in quality, that we're making a nicer city, balancing it out, looking at it as a whole. But if we could actually put some value in things like the trees, that would be
Yeah.
helpful instead of
Well, that
just letting that all go.
there's a whole there's a whole discipline around natural asset management and incorporating that into your asset management profile for the city,
Mhm.
which is and is that something that is that part of the strategic plan to like formally bring in natural asset management, or is that something you're just in the early
I've
stages of
been
looking at?
bringing that up, and I've been to some sessions at conferences and we talk about it. But in terms of, again, just being at the basics, having not had a strategic plan at all in Langford, much less a transportation plan, an active transportation plan, a parks management plan, like just the nuts and bolts that most cities have, to layer on top of that, at least a climate action plan is in our goals. And I would hope that that would lead to, we also need just a regular asset management plan, right? Like you got to replace roads, you got to take care of the whatever, the buildings, the pools, the things that chaos likes to have its way with your city. You have to be always investing in the future. So
Right.
But it is, and certainly important to make sure we're protecting our natural assets. And as Mary knows, I'm also involved in the Friends of Millstream Watershed, and there's a group here who are really active in trying to make sure that the watershed itself is protected and that it's brought back to its more natural state in some cases. And we know that here in Langford, a lot of people were affected by the atmospheric river that occurred in 2021 with houses actually being impacted and people's property being impacted. So we know that we need to get back to having those more natural assets, and maybe even where we can build rain gardens and that type of thing.
Right. To provide sort of more natural protection around some of those heavy rainfall events, right? That
we do
Yes.
have update the stormwater management requirements in
Yes.
here, but I also think that I've heard like planning better ahead. So an integrated watershed management plan is something that makes a lot of sense to me. Just like the natural asset management plan, it's like taking care of it before, like instead of trying to fix it after, taking care of it in the first place.
Exactly. And for those of you and for those people who may not be familiar with how natural asset management fits into it, so what you're taking natural assets and your engineered assets and realizing that both of them provide actual services that you can quantify, and incorporating both of those elements into your plans. So that's a big part of what that's all about, and I think that's a very important focus. So it's good to hear that you're focusing on that as well. What advice would you give to other climate champions elsewhere who might be struggling with some of the things that you've been struggling with? What are some of the things that have helped you through, or even to people who might be contemplating seeking election in the next municipal elections, who want to see some of these climate action initiatives forwarded in their communities?
Might sound a little cliche, but kind of find your people that you can relate to, that will support you, and not just support you if you do what they want, like that they really appreciate the complexities of the city. We've done not just the draft strategic plan, we did code of conduct, we did a procedure bylaw, we did, I don't know how many developments and open new businesses, and just there's a lot of distractions and good ones and some things that are unwelcome, some surprises. We had to evacuate a building that was not engineering sound.
Oh yeah.
So there's been things that take up all the staff time in the middle of some of the important long-term planning. There's going to be all of the other things. So if you can just keep connected, if you want to keep working on environmental issues and climate action, it's easy to get distracted by, we need things like an accessibility plan. So when you have, new government regulations come in and you need to spend a lot of time then focusing on accessibility issues, which I'm no expert in either. And then, oh, now the CRD wants to look at a new transportation service. Well, that takes up another month of, they have their engagement, and you need to learn as much as you can about BC Transit and everything else, because they have their survey that as counselors, you don't want to just phone it in. Like, you want to know what you're voting on here. So, so yeah, it's a lot of work that will challenge your time management and your, steadfastness. So if you can keep having people in your corner and keep connecting with people that care about the environment, and because there'll be a lot of people that do, have very loud voices that have other interests.
Right. And I think that's true. I think that's true everywhere. I think, but it probably gets amplified more because it's such a very public thing, and it's very personal to people when you're talking about your local government.
And climate change is the slow and the far away and the abstract. So if you think about the pothole in the road and you've just driven over, or no, this crosswalk needs to be here for kids' safety. Like, there's really urgency, right, in people's, we have our fear response is one of our strongest responses, and we maybe need to keep letting people know. I don't want to scare people, but try to do the hopeful message, but making sure that we keep those climate issues as part of the conversation.
Right.
And that's kind of what the Climate Hub, that really we work toward doing, is raising that awareness or keeping that awareness both within our politicians and local government, as well as provincial and federal, but also within the community. So we look forward to having tabling at various different events, and to start talking to people about climate change and the impacts it has on everyone. So that's part of the aspect of working with the Climate Hub, and certainly part of working in the watershed as well.
Well, just maybe to be a little more specific about what you just had asked me, something like making sure that I stay, as a politician, that I keep talking to people from WeCan, or I keep talking to people from the Climate Hub, that I go out to events where I get refreshed. When I'm pulling invasive species, I feel good about that. But you get caught up in all the meetings and drinking way too much coffee. It's really important to just get out there with the community, with people that care about the watershed, or care about, let's plant some trees together. Like, it's good for the soul.
Excellent. Dora, you get the last word.
Well, that's a great way to put it, Mary. I think that's really important, is just to get out and enjoy the environment and teach your children and family members about the environment is really important, to have them learn to appreciate it, and also to learn to appreciate the food that they have. So I look forward to having community gardens and that type of thing. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time this afternoon, and thank you so much for the work that you do. It is appreciated, and it does get noticed.
Thank you.
Thank you.